Hello, everybody. Hello, amazing people around the world. Henry Kissinger is dead. I feel like he was just hitting his stride. I feel like he was just getting into it, really getting warmed up, lubed up, ready to go, ready to commit. I felt like he was going to get back to his prime and really be knocking the war crimes out of the park in a way that we haven't seen, in 30, 40 years from the man. He was really getting trained. He was training. He was losing weight, cutting weight, getting there. And unfortunately, he has died in his prime at age 100. I'm going to be bringing to you probably the most destructive thing. Yes, for a man who did a countless number of destructive things. I'm going to bring you the ones you maybe have been hearing by the mainstream media as well. I'm going to just reel those off real quick in a few minutes. But I'm also going to bring you probably the most destructive thing he ever did that is essentially never talked about on your mainstream media. Definitely not on your mainstream media, but I would be surprised. I haven't so far heard even independent media outlets as they discuss Kissinger, his legacy, what he did, what his actions were throughout the many roughly 900 decades he was alive. I have not heard them talk about this, the thing I'm going to be telling you about, and that is coming up very soon. But before I get to that, let's go over a quick review of what's going on with, I believe the truce has been extended. The ceasefire has been extended for a day or two, even though it was very shaky there for a bit. Yet, let's be honest, the genocide continues, okay? Where the Gaza Health Ministry has now come back with a number of 15,000 dead for several days there. They basically 2 to 3 weeks. They said they basically lost count. There was too much rubble, too many dead, and they couldn't get an accurate number. They're now saying 15,000 have been murdered by Israel in this just insane, unhinged, psychopathic bombing that has gone on, dropping the same amount of explosive tonnage as more than 2 Hiroshima atomic bombs, something like 10 kilograms of explosives per every man, woman, and child in Gaza so far, and killing 15,000 and over 8,000 children. And let's be clear here, it continues. Whether there's a ceasefire or not, the murder continues because these people don't have water. They don't have medicine. They don't have, many of them don't have homes anymore. They don't have somewhere to be, somewhere to live. So the ethnic cleansing and the persecution continues, whether the bombs are raining down or not. On that front, in terms of what's going on in Israel, they in order to keep this going, in order to sustain this ethnic cleansing and this genocide and to continue to simply have an apartheid state, they have had to up the propaganda, up the lies. The United States government is doing everything they can to continue these pursuits. And just today, the House voted yet again. They put through a variety. Our government has put through a variety of different, we support Israel no matter what. We support their racism and their genocide and their apartheid no matter what. They've put through a variety of statements and bills and things to say that over and over again. And the latest one, which just happened today, is they put forward something that is called the Israel has the right to exist bill, which, of course, your congressperson is never going to. Well, that's the wrong one there. Hold on a second. There it is. Your congresspeople are never going to vote against that. They're never going to vote against something called the. Okay, I'm sorry, I completely screwed that up. The imagery, but anyway, it was just a headline saying that they put forward a new bill in the House. And called the Israel has the right to exist bill or something like that. But within it, it does what is key to Israeli propaganda, which is to conflate anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. And for those of you who regularly watch my 4 days a week live streams, you're tired of me talking about this, but I'll just repeat it real quick in about 12 seconds. Anti-Zionism is believing that the apartheid state of Israel should not be allowed to have an apartheid state in that way, should not be allowed to continue the persecution and ethnic cleansing against Palestinians, etc. That's anti-Zionism. Anti-Semitism is hating Jews. But there are more Zionists, there are more Christian Zionists in America than there are Jews in the world. I am an anti-Zionist Jew. That doesn't, they're not mutually exclusive. You can be anti-Zionist and Jewish. You can also be Jewish, and you can also be non-Jewish and Zionist. But in order to continue this propaganda, in order to get people to misunderstand what they can believe, what they can say, what they can talk about without being accused of anti-Semitism, they have intentionally, both the U.S. and Israel and the propaganda coming out of them and the mainstream media, have intentionally conflated these things so that people are scared to criticize Israel because they're afraid it means that they are anti-Semitist or that they will be accused of that. Anyway, that is all of that is what this bill was meant to do, is in the House. And so only 2 people voted against it, Rashida Tlaib and a Republican. And Rashida Tlaib, of course, being the only American, Palestinian American in Congress, in the House, in the federal government at all. And they're doing everything they can to try and get her out, to try and malign her. Then they've censured her. And they've offered, I covered this the other day, they offered someone $20 million, a businessman in Michigan, $20 million to run against her in order to unseat her. All of that is what's being done in Congress. But to bring you another area that Israel has had to up their propaganda game, or is trying to up their propaganda game, this is a well-known, clearly Israeli influencer. I hate the term, but I don't know what else to use. And he posted, so he has 655,000 followers. He posted a video of the Hamas tunnels, which we've all heard a lot about, right? These very sophisticated tunnels. He posted a video of the Hamas tunnels, and it was viewed ultimately by something like 8 million people. And here's the video. Now, this is being posted by a news crew, a news channel in Sweden, but it's in Swedish, so I will not play the volume very loud because I don't.
Det här klippet, som setts minst 8 miljoner gånger på plattformen X, delades av en israelisk
See, there's his post on Twitter, viewed by 8 million people. And the Swedish news show right here is explaining that these are actually tunnels underneath Stockholm. And this is video posted by the Swedish military a year ago or a year and a half ago. And yet you have 8 million people around the globe believing that these are the nefarious Hamas tunnels. And but it's this kind of garbage that needs to be put out in order to justify this genocide, these ongoing attacks and everything else. So yet again, it's just completely not true. That doesn't mean there aren't tunnels. There are tunnels, but they don't look like that. And Israel has failed to present the proof of the amazing control center underneath these hospitals that they've been bombing. But here is another area of where Israel is working very hard to put forward propaganda and lies. I've talked to you about what went on October 7th. Yes, Hamas absolutely breached the walls of their concentration camp and exited it into Israel proper, and then took many hostages. And then they were in, it seems, many firefights with the IDF, and the IDF killed everyone they could. They killed hostages. They shot tank rounds into civilian buildings. And they don't want people knowing a lot of that. They don't want people knowing that a lot of the deaths on October 7th were due to the IDF. And so here's Max Blumenthal with the Gray Zone. He is showing that in this article, which is not, this is, in a Israeli newspaper, it's not a secret. They say Israel plans to bury hundreds of cars with ashes and blood stains that are evidence from October 7th. They're going to bury them. And not only are they going to bury them, but they said, in order to save space and be as environmentally friendly as possible, they explained that the cars may be shredded before being buried. So does this sound like they are completely fine with all the evidence that is on these cars covered in bloodstains and bullet holes and everything else? The fact that they are being shredded and buried? I mean, nothing screams more we've got something to cover up than shredding and burying hundreds of vehicles that were involved in October 7th. Now, I assume that the real reasons is because it's probably not that tough for an expert to figure out whether these are IDF rounds that went through these cars, even if the bullets are no longer there, because I assume all that was cleaned up. But maybe an expert is able to tell what kind of bullets went through these vehicles. Maybe they're able to tell that, oh, this is a tank round that hit this vehicle. I would imagine that type of thing can easily be surmised by an expert. And then, of course, that's not even to mention more complicated testing like blood testing, DNA testing, all that stuff. And clearly Israel does not want whatever evidence this is to get out. And so you've got to ask yourself, why is that? Why is it Israel would shred and bury cars? And is it to be environmentally friendly? Is that because if you believe that, then you are hopeless. I've got a bridge to sell you in Brooklyn that I've shredded and buried. I've shredded and buried a Brooklyn Bridge, and I'm going to sell you a piece of it. Just totally nuts for them to say this is proving our innocence, right? Clearly, everything we've told you about October 7th is accurate, and we just want to be environmentally friendly by shredding and burying these things. Okay. So to move on to another aspect of the war crimes that Israel has committed, which I've mentioned, but new information has come out, and that is the targeting and assassination of journalists. Dozens, in fact. And here are the latest numbers, which are I had not seen before yesterday. Israel has killed more journalists in Gaza in 7 weeks than all 20 years of the Vietnam War and all 6 years of World War II. Because, and I know that may sound kind of crazy, like how is it that more have been killed? Because even in wars as horrific as Vietnam and World War II, they weren't aiming for journalists. They generally, both sides were trying to avoid journalists because it made them look bad. It looked like a war crime. It looked intentional. It looked like they were trying to cover things up. So even as the U.S. was committing, and we'll get to Henry Kissinger in a moment, even as the U.S. was committing war crime after war crime after war crime in Vietnam, just bombing and obliterating whole towns, they were not aiming for journalists. And so that's how you end up with Israel killing more people in 7 weeks, more journalists in 7 weeks in Gaza than than journalists killed the entirety of the Vietnam War. They're saying that 63 journalists were killed in Vietnam by both sides. 69 were killed in World War II by all parties. 70 have been killed in Gaza by Israel alone since October 7th. And as I've mentioned before on these live streams, it's very clear that Israel is targeting journalists because many times they will call, some of the time, not all of them, they will call the house of a journalist and say, we're going to bomb you soon. And you may go, well, that shows they're trying to protect them. Well, not really. They're hoping still that they destroy that person's family, their house, their ability to survive. The reason they do the phone call at all is because they want plausible deniability. They want to go, we tried to save them, we tried to give them an excuse. Now, if they don't answer the phone, or the wrong person answers the phone, or they think it's a prank call, which Israelis are doing a lot of these prank calls, telling people that their houses are going to be bombed, then the person gets killed anyway. So he may get the phone call and be assassinated anyway. But it proves that Israel is aiming for these people. They are aiming for journalist houses, and they are trying to kill them. And that's how you end up with so many dead, 70 already. It really is just a horror show of unbelievable proportions. And the U.S. the U.S. mainstream media is defending a lot of this. Yes, I've brought you the times where sometimes the truth slips out on CNN and other networks, but they're defending a lot of this. Of course, then there's Fox News that tells you Hezbollah's living in your inside your dresser in your bedroom. But even CNN and NPR and these others are at times having to admit that these war crimes are happening, but most of the time are running interference to try and defend Israel's actions in one form or another. MSNBC has just fired or canceled the show of Mad Hassan. Now, Mad Hassan is not someone I am a big fan of because he is basically a liberal. He basically does the bullshit manufacturing of consent that MSNBC brings you every day, 24/7. Actually, I think they've upped it to 25/7. That's right, 25 hours a day. Because they were doing 24/7 and they decided that's just not enough for the propaganda they're pumping out. So they increased it to 25/7. Anyway, normally he does all of that for the other aspects, for most of the proxy war in Ukraine, etc. He's doing that kind of liberal garbage. But the thing is, he is not so terrible on Palestine. I believe he's Muslim, and apparently he is better on Palestine than, most people you're going to see on MSNBC, etc. And that's why they have to cancel his show. And as I brought to you within the days of October 7th, they had taken him and the two other Muslim anchors or correspondents they have. So the entire Muslim population of MSNBC was taken off the air in one form or another. They were allowed to do short little segments, but they weren't allowed to do any more than that. At least that was like that for a few days. Then they brought the shows back, but now you have Mad Hassan being canceled. So, it's because they can't allow that. The truth, just a tiny bit of truth about Israel is enough to really shred all of the propaganda, because truth it blossoms in the brain far easier than manufacturing consent for bombing babies. Like, it's very easy to tell someone we shouldn't or they shouldn't or whoever shouldn't murder a baby or a child. That's easy. It's much more difficult. It takes a lot of propaganda and manipulation and various types of psychological control to get people to run around cheering for the murder of babies and children. And that is what MSNBC and CNN and Fox News and CBS and NBC and PBR, PBS and BBC and CBC and did I get them all? That's what they're involved in. So, all right. Now they brought you that, and I think I'm going to come back to Israel for a few minutes later, but let's get to Henry Kissinger. Because the key act, in my view, of Henry Kissinger's life that caused the most destruction and that ties in Israel, U.S. empire, endless war crimes, U.S. militarism, and climate crisis, ties it all together in a nice little bundle. That story, that fact of his life is being ignored and covered up by not just the entirety of the mainstream media, but I have yet to hear it mentioned on even independent media, even the ones that are doing great work on Henry Kissinger, calling him a war criminal, etc. And so that's why I want to bring this to you. And that's why I think this is incredibly important. He has just died. For those of you who don't know that, he died at 100 years old. To put that in perspective, when JFK was assassinated, he was already 40 years old. To me, that is just so crazy, because in my mind, JFK was assassinated roughly 97 years ago. Roughly 200 years ago, JFK was assassinated. It was in black and white. Do you understand? JFK was assassinated in black and white. That's how long ago it was. One guy had a camera when JFK was just Zapruder. It was the only dude with a camera. With a video camera. Anyway, Kissinger's epically old. So first, let me bring you, and by the way, just a quick pause here. Please, if you're watching this on whatever platform, hit thumbs up It takes you 2 seconds, and it really does help get this out there. It helps people see it. So do that and click subscribe or follow. It doesn't matter what platform you're on, Rumble, YouTube, Facebook. Hit the subscribe. It's all free. Hit subscribe, follow on Facebook, follow, whatever. And it really does make a difference. So please do that. I know thousands of you are watching around the world, and yet a tiny percentage of you will take the time to hit the thumbs up. So please do that. Okay. Let's get to, and hello to everyone at Locals. You keep this show going. So thank you for doing that. That's at leecamp.net. Okay. So I want to bring to you first the crimes that Kissinger committed that most people know about, or at least they're being covered right now in his death. Many people are talking about them. I'm bringing you this list from Breakthrough News, which I've just started a new show with. Actually, if we have time at the end of this hour, I might actually play the first episode from Breakthrough News. I might play it on this live stream. But okay. Here are Kissinger's crimes. This is just his highlights. This is just his best of. This is like his best. This is like his top 5 of the horrible shit that Kissinger was involved in. He oversaw the massacre of millions in Vietnam. He was a key advisor as millions are being massacred in Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos from 1969 to 1973. He was the mastermind behind the carpet bombing of Cambodia, bombing that was indiscriminate and hit as many women and children and innocent civilians as it hit fighters of one kind or another. Now, there's many who make a legitimate argument for if you're in a country and someone else is invading it, maybe you should be a fighter. But that being said, indiscriminate bombing of Cambodia. To this day, Cambodia is still the most bombed country ever. And they were deliberately targeting civilians. He helped orchestrate the 1973 coup against Chile's socialist president Salvador Allende. There was a U.S.-backed coup against him. Within the days of that happening, he was then suicided. He was, as they were taking over the palace or the whatever it was called, he suicided himself, and he was replaced with the fascist dictator Augusto Pinochet. Pinochet murdered and tortured many, many thousands of people during his 16 years as ruler of Chile. And Kissinger was not just an advisor on this, but orchestrated it. Very pivotal in that massacre and that horror show. He aided and armed Suharto in Indonesia during his genocidal invasion of East Timor in 1975. Kissinger also helped Pakistani dictator Yahya Khan as he massacred millions in Bangladesh. Kissinger also gave approval in 1976 to Argentina's brutal, dirty war, during which they murdered and disappeared over 30,000 leftists or those associated with them. Kissinger, despite being Jewish, was also an anti-Semite. He has many quotes that you can read of how he, just seemed to have a really remarkable hatred for Jews. And he actually said the quote that if it hadn't been for the fact that he was born Jewish, he would probably be an anti-Semite. And here's the thing, though. You can be Jewish and be an anti-Semite, and I believe he was one. So that's just the list of kind of the things that he masterminded, that he was really a huge part of. But he also was a key advisor or a very important advisor throughout the many decades that came after his time as Secretary of State. He was an advisor for basically every president, the invasions of Iraq that killed millions, the war on terror that killed, the estimation is 6 million people our war on terror has killed. That's 1 million directly, 5 million indirectly, according to the cost of war study by Brown University. And he was in the shadows during all of this, and they would go to him. He was a key advisor for Hillary Clinton and the Clintons, and just so many people in the, even if I don't know how much Bush consulted him, but even if Bush wasn't speaking to him, I'm sure others in his cabinet and in the government were. And he actually amazingly lived long enough to get to the point where our government is so right-wing and murderous that he's slightly less murderous than the other ones ruling things. He got, in just the past couple of years, he was saying that the U.S. should stop the proxy war in Ukraine, wrap it up as quickly as possible. He was actually speaking for peace in Ukraine as the U.S. pushes for more war in Ukraine. Now, he wasn't doing that because he cares about a Ukrainian person or children or innocent civilians or cares about blood lost or lives destroyed. None of that. He was saying that because he believes it's harming the U.S. empire to continue the proxy war in Ukraine. So he actually lived so long that he is not the tip of the spear when it comes to the psychopathic nature of our government these days. But all of that I just gave you, I feel skips over the key quote unquote achievement of Henry Kissinger. The key thing that has caused the most destruction, most death, and will ultimately cause the most death of humans around the world. And that is the creation of the petrodollar. He is the guy. And the petrodollar to this day is one of the most suppressed and covered up stories. It's never said on mainstream media, can't be talked about. There's essentially no real, even Wikipedia article for it. There's a vague one called Petro currencies or something. But and until 2016, the actual details of the petrodollar deal, even though many knew it had happened, the actual details were covered up until 2016 when Bloomberg apparently through a Freedom of Information Act got the details. And thank you, Kevin, for the donation. He says RT is kissing Kissinger's ass right now. Well, I'm sorry to hear that, but I don't have anything to do with RT anymore, and I don't know what the hell they're reporting. But anyway, but thank you, Kevin, for the donation. I really appreciate it. Okay, so let me. I'm not going to explain every detail about the petrodollar, but here's some of the key details. This is coming from everythingeverywhere.com. And the reason it's not coming from some mainstream media outlet is they will not, if you Google for petrodollar coverage, it is tiny, minuscule. It really is one of the most suppressed topics. And yet it gives the U.S. all of our power. The U.S. would not be an empire without it. So in February 1973, the United States still wanted to have a strong dollar, right? We had ended gold-backed currency, so the U.S. no longer had that gold backing that really gave the dollar some power. Now, the reason that they got off the gold standard is because the U.S. government wanted to print as many dollars as they wanted. And if you're pinned to gold, you can't do that. You can only print as much as gold as you have. So they were like, we want to print all the dollars in the world. So they got off the gold standard. But the problem is that then causes the dollar to be less strong. It slowly fades in its strength. The United States still wanted to have a strong dollar, and they still wanted everyone to have to use its currency, meaning the whole world to use a lot of dollars. The problem was if they couldn't use currency pegs and gold convertibility to make that happen, how could they do it? In 1973, the dollar was sinking in value. And here's how this all links into Israel as well. In October, several Arab countries invaded Israel in what is known as the 1973 war, the Yom Kippur War, or the Fourth Arab-Israeli War, depending on which country you're in. The United States supported Israel via arms sales, and in response, the Arab members of OPEC, the Organization of Oil Exporting States, issued an oil embargo against the United States and other Western countries. So you see, in 1973, OPEC has all this power. When they want the United States to do something, they can say, we're going to raise the price of oil. We're not going to put out as much oil. And all of a sudden, the U.S. doesn't have the energy it needs. It's unable to continue the foreign policy that they want to do, that these psychopaths at the top of, this doesn't mean every Arab country doesn't have psychopaths at the top of some of them too, but especially Saudi Arabia. But it meant the U.S. had to answer to someone else in a big way. And the Arab countries were not happy about the establishment of Israel and the Nakba, and which Israel killed 700,000 Palestinians, and they were forced into tiny refugee areas. I think one of them is called Gaza. I'm not sure if you've heard of that one. And so the U.S. is in a real jam, to put it lightly. We're running out of oil. Oil prices are going through the moon. People are waiting in line for oil. The dollar is weakening. Long lines of gasoline began appearing everywhere. The U.S. National Security Advisor, Henry Kissinger, saw a way out of all of this mess. With a single stroke, it was possible to end the oil embargo and return the U.S. dollar to its place at the center of the world monetary system. Kissinger and U.S. Treasury Secretary William Simon began working on a plan whereby the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia would agree to price all of its oil sales in U.S. dollars. All of Saudi Arabian oil sales in U.S. dollars. OPEC would soon follow, because Saudi Arabia basically leads OPEC. And so Simon, the Treasury Secretary, goes over and meets with Saudi King Faisal. And as I said, the details of this deal were covered up until 2016, very recently. They came to an agreement, King Faisal and the U.S., that has been one of the most defining moments of the last 50 years. King Faisal agreed to price all oil sales in U.S. dollars, and they would then invest much of their dollar surplus in U.S. Treasury bonds. In exchange, the United States agreed to buy Saudi oil in dollars, to sell weapons to Saudi Arabia in dollars, and also agreed to use the U.S. military to protect Saudi Arabia and keep the House of Saud in power. So Saudi Arabia gets a lot out of this. It's a great deal for them. They have their security insured by the largest, most powerful military in the world. It doesn't cost them anything. They're able to price their primary export in a high-priced, stable currency and invest the proceeds in a stable, safe way. This agreement turned out to be one of the most important international agreements of the latter half of the 20th century, and no one knew about it for 40 years, or at least not the details. It was kept secret until 2016 when Bloomberg News finally got the details. Neither side had any incentive for the story to go public, and it was basically kept a secret the entire time, even though I remember people telling me, like, you should look into the petrodollar, like, back in 2011. So it's not like no one ever heard of it, or at least the theory behind it, but the details were not out. So now, suddenly, everyone in the world needed U.S. dollars in order to pay for oil, in order to power their entire systems. I mean, the power of the world was at that moment based on dollars. This meant that the U.S. dollar was the global reserve currency, which also gave it power. All of this was to say that the U.S. could now print all the money that we fucking wanted, and it wouldn't lose power for the most part. It wouldn't lose power even if we kept printing and printing and printing. And this is how the U.S. has been able to spend $1 trillion a year on military and grow the largest military the world has ever seen and not be hurting. It's also how the U.S. And not be hurting, at least in that way. I mean, we're hurting in other ways. Nobody can get health care and life sucks. But in this certain regard, the dollar kept its power. And so over $1 trillion a year of military, over 800 to 900 military bases around the world. And it's all funded by this system that no one in the mainstream media can talk about. Almost no one in independent media talks about. And it's truly unbelievable that this can remain so quiet and so covered up. So to continue from the article, now suddenly everyone in the world needed U.S. dollars. Oil-producing states needed to do something with their surplus dollars, and U.S. treasuries provide an easy way to absorb almost all this money. Kissinger dubbed it petrodollar recycling. For the most part, it is still in place today. And of course, this is also the waning of this system, the intrusion of this system is also what's happening right now around the world. You have large economies now talking about selling and buying oil outside of the petrodollar. But let me back up a minute and say, why did I say this is the most destructive thing Kissinger ever did? Is because the many of the U.S. invasions and destructions of countries. Now, the U.S. has upended and destroyed too many countries to count over the past 60 years, right? Since World War II, and you couldn't even list them if you try. Not only some of those. Is it full invasion? Is it full bombing and invasion? And to that level of we are going to utterly destroy your society. With most of the others, it is assassination. It's causing a coup. It's like what we, have done in so many Latin American countries and some African countries, and all that stuff is done around the world. But the invasion stuff, we're going to obliterate you, is reserved mainly for countries that drop the petrodollar, that refuse to be within our, and this goes up to at least a few years ago. Now it's a little different, but let's just up to a few years ago. The countries that would drop the petrodollar would be brutally invaded by us or NATO or others. The biggest examples are Iraq dropped the petrodollar and stopped aligning with us, started going outside of our system of oil and dollars. And, Saddam Hussein found himself hanging from the trees. Gaddafi in Libya decided to go outside the petrodollar, was talking about creating an African currency called the gold dinar. And he found himself bayoneted in the streets. And we returned Libya to the open air slave markets and just warring factions. And just we took one of the most advanced societies in Africa and obliterated it. Syria is another one that we have truly murdered their society. Nowadays in Syria, thanks to both invasion, bombing, and everything else, but really economic war. You have 94%, according to the UN rapporteur, 94% of Syrians live below the poverty line. 94% of Syrians are not really sure where they're going to get their meals in a few weeks, and where they're going to get the gas to heat those meals, and where they're going to get the gas to heat their homes or whatever structures they're able to find to live in. All of those countries went outside the petrodollar aggressively, and that, so by setting up this system, the U.S. tied its power, its empirical power, to the petrodollar, and anything that went outside of that was a threat to that power. Now, for the first time, however, we are seeing that many larger countries, China is obviously the biggest one that with the most power on this front, but you have China, Saudi Arabia, Russia, Brazil, forming BRICS, going outside the petrodollar, at least for some transactions. And it is a major threat to the U.S. petrodollar and the U.S. empire as a whole, and the ability of the U.S. to print endless money. Which, by the way, when you say print endless money, 6% or 98% of all money is not printed anymore. So basically, you mean pushing a button, boop, $1 trillion. That's what the U.S. does. Last thing on this, in terms of why this is the most destructive thing that Kissinger ever did in his life. Last thing on this is this has ensured with near certainty climate crisis, which we're now seeing the first decade of. This has ensured that the U.S. has to maintain petroleum usage around the world. And therefore, by petrodollar being what gives America our power We need the petro to keep flowing. So every time you ever hear a top US politician say that they want to move outside of fossil fuels, or they care about the climate, or we're going to have more wind energy, or we're going to have electric cars, they don't mean it, not in a big enough way. Because if the US and the globe go outside of petroleum fully and find limitless energy, let's say, in fusion or wind or solar or something like that, the US power is gone. And so they will fight for petroleum, and they will fight for fossil fuels forevermore. So Kissinger caused millions and millions of deaths, and the climate crisis obviously will continue. And this also connects to Israel because of the deal that they made with Saudi Arabia meant that Arab states were no longer pressuring against Israel and saying that Palestinians should be treated right. So this ties into that as well. And like I said, probably the most pivotal decision, most pivotal idea that Kissinger ever had, never discussed in your mainstream. Cannot be discussed in your mainstream. Cannot be mentioned. Okay, so that being said, to go back to Israel for a minute, I want to play a second of Noam Chomsky from 7 years ago for you to understand what Israel means to the U.S. empire and to colonialism. And this is Kissinger 7 years ago speaking to the UN, this was posted 7 years ago. I think it was current at the time, but I just want to play a little piece of this in terms of why does the U.S. support Israel?
Also, this is just part of colonization. This is the last phase of European colonization. And notice that the countries that are most strongly in support of Israel are not just the United States. It's the United States, Australia, and Canada, the offshoots of England, Anglosphere sometimes called, unusual forms of imperialism. These are settler colonial societies, societies in which not like India, not like the British in India, say, the societies in South Africa was a little like this, or Algeria under the French. Settler colonial societies in which the settlers came in, essentially eliminated the native population, also driven by religious principles, very religious groups driven by Christian Zionism. Those are major cultural factors. There are also significant geostrategic factors. You go back to 1948, there was actually a split between the State Department and the Pentagon in the United States over how to react to the new state of Israel. The State Department was not committed strongly to Israeli conquests, the establishment of the state, and was concerned about the refugees. It wanted an implementation of the refugee problem. The Pentagon, on the other hand, was very impressed with Israel's military potential. The Israeli military successes, if you look back at the internal record and declassified, the Joint Chiefs of Staff described Israel as the second largest military force in the region after Turkey and a potential base for U.S. power in the region.
Okay, so there's a bunch of reasons that the U.S. supports Israel right there. And of course, this is Chomsky talking 7 years ago. This is not a modern, this is modern, this is not present day ideas. These have been around for a while. What he's explaining there. The difference is that nowadays people are starting to pay attention to the fact that it is a colonial project. It is settler colonialism. One of the reasons the U.S. quote unquote supports Israel no matter what is because it's, as RFK Jr. said, although he was endorsing it, Israel is a battleship for the U.S. in the Middle East. The U.S. views Israel as a giant, military base that we can control in the Middle East. And these are all reasons that the U.S. endorses and supports Israel. But as we're seeing, the propaganda is fading. People are fighting angrily to get outside of this garbage, to get outside of the inequality and the death and destruction that is connected to settler colonial project like this. And it's been very impressive the past many days to see so many people standing up and fighting back and protesting on the front lines. And I've been very energized to see the fight back, even though witnessing and being a witness, as we all are, to this genocide is really tough, really horrific. To see that any country could be this this cold and calloused in terms of just endless murder and endless bombing of hospitals and destruction of the medical system and bombing of schools, and they've killed something like over 50 or 60 UN workers because they're targeting them as well. Just it is unbelievable, but seeing people fight back and seeing the protests and seeing people on the front lines has been really beautiful. And I think it speaks to how much people have learned. So many people are learning about this topic in a way they never have before. People are no longer believing the propaganda that gets spit out of the mouths of your mainstream media. And it really is powerful. And so much of the world also, not just the United States, but so much of the world is standing up against this. And you look at the polling and everything, and it's the vast majority of the world population does not think there should be an oppressive apartheid state in Israel, Palestine, with refugees stuck in concentration camp, the tiny areas, as they're with their water controlled and their calories controlled, and they're not allowed to leave or even fish in their own waters, or the vast majority of the world, and 80% of the world's population is in countries that aren't siding with the U.S. proxy war in Ukraine either, which we're now hearing, as I've been bringing you on my live streams, we're now hearing from even the tops of many governments. They now know that this that this is over. In fact, let's see if I can find the clip. Even MSNBC, Morning Joe, is now admitting what independent media has been saying about Ukraine. Oh, good. I found it. All right. So, and this is my ongoing series about I was right. I didn't mean for it to be an ongoing series, but it always seems to pop back up. Oh, it turns out we were right again. Those of us in independent media who were saying the opposite of what your trash dumpster fire mainstream media was saying, and they called us traitors and they go after us. And there's been articles written about how traitorous we are for daring to say that there shouldn't be a proxy war in Ukraine, and the only ones who really suffer are Ukrainians to have endless fighting and endless war that the U.S. is pushing. But so for all of this, a year and a half, coming up on 2 years of this proxy war in Ukraine, your mainstream media has been endorsing it, right? And has been going after any of us who said, sit down at a peace table now. That's where this is going to end. And eventually that is where this ends, is a peace table deciding how to stop bombing each other and do it now. And in fact, it was going to be done a month into the fighting, less than a month. And the U.S. sent Boris Johnson over there and his crazy hair saying, stop. And they got them to stop the peace process. They got Ukraine to stop the peace process. I've covered that many times as well. By the way, top Ukrainian officials now admitting that as well. But here is MSNBC. What do you know? Coming around and realizing that we're right, that independent media is right all along.
I think NATO's done an extraordinary job. How much longer do we continue pushing? I think what many people in the Pentagon would think is the unrealistic goal of Ukraine driving every last Russian out of their country.
It's exactly the right question, Joe. And what concerns me is when people get disillusioned and increasingly come to where you and I are, that as desirable as it is, it's simply not feasible. They're going to increasingly say, and we're hearing it in the House, we're hearing it in parts of Europe, why should we keep doing this? We're already stretched. We're trying to support Israel. We're worried about Taiwan. And even if we give everything we need to give or want to give to Ukraine, it still won't lead to success. What I argued, therefore, is the United States needs to have some very direct conversations with Ukraine, with President Zelensky, talk about reducing their emphasis on liberating land.
Anyway, You get the point. This is MSNBC, which is one of the biggest manufacturers for consent of war, admitting on their, this might even be their most watched show, one of their most watched shows, that it's time to sit down and end this thing at a table, at a peace table. And it's what those of us who knew this was a bullshit proxy war from day one, it's what those of us who knew that said. We said it again and again and again, that the U.S. was fighting this proxy war to the last Ukrainian, killing Ukrainians in order to support geopolitical ends of our own, of the U.S. governments, such as sanctions against Russia, trying to split Russia from the world community, but especially from Europe. The sanctions backfired, much of them on Russia, however, backfired away from Russia. However, the separating them from Europe worked. Russia has now been almost completely severed from Europe economically, putting Europe back into a kind of vassal system underneath the United States, which is what the U.S. wanted. So in some ways, the U.S. got what they wanted. We blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. We got to have that fun. Yay! Releasing more methane than the world has ever seen, which is something like 20 times or 100 times or whatever it is more harmful to the more contributive to the climate crisis than carbon dioxide. So we got some of what we wanted, but we didn't get everything that the U.S. government wanted. But through all that, there's been no concern for Ukrainians. There's been no concern for the fact that their society is getting destroyed, that their people are getting killed, that there are mass migrations. None of that has mattered to the U.S. at all. And so here you have one of the biggest propaganda bullhorns coming that is created by corporate America, MSNBC, saying, even they are now saying, it seems like maybe it's a good time to sit down and hammer out like a peace deal or something, and maybe not just keep fighting endlessly. So there you have it. Even from the mainstream media, even they are saying it. Okay, I'm going to close today with my new episode from Breakthrough News. It's called the series is called America Inc. This is the top 11. It's only 8 minutes long. This is the top 11 companies that are supporting and endorsing and getting rich off of Israel's crimes. And it's comedy and politics, comedy and politics and news, as you'll see. And if you enjoy it, whether you enjoy it or not, you know what? Even if you hate it, it would really be awesome if you guys could support this show by becoming a member at leecamp.net. That'll forward you to my locals page. If you're watching on Rumble, you can just click the red Join Lee button and you'll become a member of the community. You get all kinds of cool shit. You get my ebook, Dangerous Ideas. You get these live streams whenever you want. They disappear on other platforms. You get extra segments I often do for locals. You get extra articles I sometimes do. You get to be a part of the community over there at locals at leecamp.net. You get to post your own stuff there. Locals, if you haven't heard of it, is kind of like a combination between Patreon and Facebook, where you're supporting my show, but you're also becoming a member of the community. So please do become a member over there. It's the only way that I can keep this show going. I am the most censored comedian in America. I had my main YouTube channel with 250,000 people banned around the world. My podcast banned around the world, etc. Okay, so here is, without further ado, and I'll be joining you tomorrow, by the way, at 3 p.m. Eastern. I'll have presidential candidate Jill Stein on as well. But here it is. Without further ado, this is my new episode from Breakthrough News of America Inc. If you like this episode, also let Breakthrough News know that they should keep the show going. Let them know that this show is something that you would like to see. And with that, I will bid you farewell. However, you can enjoy this episode, and the live stream will end after it. Keep fighting. You would think with all the war crimes and atrocities and being committed by Israel right now, that corporations would not want their brand names slapped on top of the rubble that was once a school or a medical clinic. But in fact, many companies don't seem to care Here are the top 11 corporations deepest in bed with Israel. Can you be deep in bed? Let's start with weapons contractors, since they're the most villainous.
It's warlord.
The stocks of the big war profiteers have shot up since Israel's attack on Gaza began. Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, General Dynamics, and BAE Systems have gained more than $30 billion in value over just the past few weeks. You know what they say? Every time Israel blows up a hospital, a Lockheed investor gets his wings, meaning the private jet. Much of the billions the U.S. sends to Israel ends up in the pockets of these weapons contractors. So your tax dollars go directly to them, and they're not even ashamed of it. Lockheed Martin says it's proud of the significant role it has fulfilled in the security of the state of Israel. Of course, let's not forget Raytheon, which provides missiles for Israel's Iron Dome defense system.
It's kind of been a personal mission to, keep pushing and not let the naysayers say I can't.
Among other things. And smaller war profiteers like Woodward, which we know provides bombs to rain down on Gazans because they still have the label on them. Huh? At least take the brand name off before you bomb the hospital. Make an effort. If Adidas can get rid of all their Kanye stuff because they're embarrassed, you can put a little smiley face sticker over your brand name when you commit a war crime.
He made a lot of money off of it.
For the most part, war profiteers are not too concerned about their brand image. Well, except that time BAE Systems tried to whitewash their brand by putting out videos of British troops reading fairy tales to children.
I'm going to read you the story of Hansel and Gretel.
I put a barf bag under your seat if you need it right now. Then there are the many companies connected to the apartheid state that you might never guess. Number 10, Motorola.
Hello, Moto.
They don't just make skinny flip phones that get lost in your crack anymore. The crack of your couch. No, they help with surveillance of Palestinians in the settlements, which even the UN considers illegal under international law. Might be better for you, Motorola, if you just got back in my crack. Of my couch. Number 9, U.S. police departments. Officer down! Okay, so it's not a corporation, but in this case, it's your tax dollars that are helping to fund Israel's human rights abuses. Amnesty International reported, with whom are many U.S. police departments training? With a chronic human rights violator, Israel. So basically, you and I are paying the brutal American police forces to go to Israel and pay their brutal police forces to teach our brutal police forces how to be even more brutal. God, that's just an MC Escher staircase of awful. Number 8, Caterpillar. When a man named Benjamin Holt went into business building good old wagon wheels in the late 1800s, little did he know his company would one day crush the houses of Palestinians in occupied territories. Next time you're thinking of stealing land or crushing dreams, think Caterpillar. Number 7, Hewlett-Packard. As reported by BDSmovement.net, they provide computer hardware to the Israeli army and maintain data centers through their servers for the Israeli police, forming the backbone of Israel's racial segregation and apartheid. Way to go, Hewlett-Packard. And who says racism can't be high-tech?
Do you want to destroy humans? Please say no.
Okay, I will destroy humans.
Number 6, Pepsi. In partnership with Sabra Hummus. Yes, that's right. Pepsi works with Israeli brand Sabra, which is quite proud of its support of the Israeli military. They support the Golani Reconnaissance Platoon, infamous for its decades of slaughtering Palestinians, most recently during Operation Cast Lead. Well, that's it. I'm switching from Pepsi to Coca-Cola. Number 5, Coca-Cola. Oh, man. Their support of Israel goes back decades. And in 1997, the country's Chamber of Commerce and Economic Mission praised its chairman, Roberto Gozueta, for 30 years of support and for refusing to honor an Arab boycott. No Coke or Pepsi? Guess I'll have to switch to Fanta. Oh, come on! Number 4, McDonald's. Mickey D's. has been a longtime supporter of the apartheid regime, often ready at a moment's notice to supply the IDF with free diarrhea. McDonald's is also a major partner of the Jewish United Fund, which works to maintain American military, economic, and diplomatic support for Israel, monitors, and when necessary, responds to media coverage of Israel. When I go into McDonald's, I want to get my fried antibiotic-filled chicken paste balls of nugget-type things without having to also support atrocities. Maybe Burger King is opposed to crimes against humanity. Number 3, L'Oreal. The French cosmetics giant has extensive business ties with Israel. They even put out natural sea beauty products made from Dead Sea minerals. Even though the West Bank borders the Dead Sea, the entire area and its resources are off limits to Palestinians to let Israel exploit it for mining and international tourism.
It's not that I care about money. It's that I care about my hair.
L'Oreal also doesn't care about war crimes, land theft, false imprisonment, segregation, children forced to drink unsafe water. Instead, they care about hair. If only Israel were committing crimes against hair instead of humanity, then L'Oreal might cut ties with them.
This is genuine human hair.
This is legal, right?
Yeah, sure, whatever.
Number 2, Starbucks. Former chairman and founder Howard Schultz has long been staunchly pro-Israel, seemingly fine with any level of war crimes and racism the country commits. In 2002, Israel's foreign ministry praised Schultz for being key to the country's long-term PR success. But beyond that, just in the past couple of weeks, Schultz and Starbucks have been exploiting the violence in Gaza and Israel to attack union members. I can't believe Howard Schultz would do that. I mean, I would have thought a company that's been accused of union busting, abusing their employees, sourcing coffee from slave labor, and blending the last remaining unicorns into some sort of iced coffee drink would be better than this.
They got any just coffee?
Our cafe du jour is New Zealand Peaberry.
Right on.
Number 1, General Mills. The parent company of such beloved brands as Betty Crocker, Cheerios, Chex Mix, Yoplait, Pillsbury, and Lucky Charms, General Mills has for many years produced some of their products on stolen Palestinian land. Et tu, Doughboy. But here's the good part. After a 2-year campaign calling on General Mills to stop making products on stolen Palestinian land, the company gave in and left with their tail between their legs. Does the Doughboy have a tail?
Hi, stranger.
The case of General Mills shows that pressure and boycotts work. They work. But even if they didn't, none of us should be giving money to companies that support apartheid, imprisonment, and crimes against humanity. From here on out, I'm blending my own freaking unicorns. So that's it. The top companies in bed with the Israeli regime. This was the first episode of a new series by me, Lee Camp, and Breakthrough News. In order to keep seeing more of these, please support my work at leecamp.net. Thanks. Keep fighting.